Hey guys, tonight we step into a world where dew glistens on the tiniest of orchards, and every droplet feels like a secret waiting to be discovered. You're walking barefoot along a narrow earthen path, the cool mud squishing softly beneath your toes, while the scent of damp soil and young leaves drifts through the morning air. You might think you're too tired to notice the subtle hum of a distant fountain, but trust me, you're sharper than you give yourself credit for. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Oh, and drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where you're tuning in from. Now, wind down and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing at the edge of an orchard so carefully curated it almost feels like it belongs to a dream. Tiny peach trees no taller than your knee spread their branches in tidy rows, each one pruned into gentle curves that mimic the shape of a traditional Ottoman archway. A light haze of mist hovers just above the ground, turning every leaf into a silvery mosaic. You blink, and it's as if the world has paused, save for the soft rustle of leaves and the steady rhythm of pruning shears opening and closing in the distance. The main pathway, framed by miniature pomegranate trees bursting with glossy new buds, leads you deeper into the grove. You recall that the Topkapi Palace gardens were renowned for their formal layouts and exotic plantings, an essential symbol of Ottoman sophistication and power. It's a mainstream historical fact that these gardens weren't just ornamental, they were living showcases of botanical knowledge imported from as far away as Persia and Andalusia, underscoring the empire's vast trade networks. But here's a quirky detail. Gardeners sometimes painted the cuts on young branches with rosewater mixed with crushed mint leaves, believing the fragrance would ward off insects drawn to the fresh wounds. You can almost smell that minty sweetness mingling with the earth as you breathe in. Near a small stone basin, a gardener kneels on a woven mat, his fingers deftly tying a slender branch to a bamboo stake. He hums a low tune, perhaps an old folk song passed down from his grandfather, while dusting the branch joints with fine clay powder to seal the cut. Every movement is deliberate, almost ritualistic, as if each tiny branch carries the weight of tradition. Sunlight begins to filter through the wooden trellis overhead, casting a lattice of shadows that dance across the ground. A fountain gurgles softly somewhere beyond sight, and you sense the gardeners rely on its gentle murmur as a metronome, guiding their slow, measured snips. They work in hushed coordination, each aware of how a misplaced cut could spell disaster for the fruit to come. You crouch beside a knife-wielding artisan, its blade no longer than your palm and sharpened to a hairline edge. This isn't your ordinary gardening tool, it's forged from the famed Damascene steel traded through Ottoman markets, a testament to a civilization that prized metallurgy as much as horticulture. As the craftsman oils the blade with a drop of olive oil, you notice microscopic golden lake glinting along the handle, an artistic flourish that elevates a simple shear into a work of art. While you study the knife, a colony of ladybugs flutters among the leaves, their red shells flashing like tiny lanterns. These beetles are welcome guests, feasting on aphids that would otherwise nibble the new buds to shreds. Nearby, something more unwelcome scuttles. A cluster of scale insects clings to the bark, sucking sap until the gardener spots them and deftly brushes them into a small basket. You lean back and take it all in. The geometry of the orchard beds, the harmony of man and nature, the almost ceremonial quiet. It's easy to forget you're in the heart of a sprawling palace complex, where courtly intrigues and diplomatic emissaries vie for the sultan's favor. Yet here, beneath this trellis of miniature fruit trees, time seems suspended. Historians still debate whether these tiny groves served as private retreats for contemplation or as elaborate status symbols meant to impress dignitaries during midday promenades. As the sun climbs a little higher, dew droplets evaporate into wisps of mist, and the gardeners exchange brief nods. You sense a collective exhale, as though the grove itself has sighed in contentment at surviving another dawn. You tuck a stray tendril of hair behind your ear, feeling both like an honored guest and a silent witness to traditions centuries old. You stand, brushing loose soil from your clothes, and wonder how many hands have performed these same morning tasks, each generation imbuing the orchard with lessons learned and superstitions whispered at twilight. You take one last look at the miniature pomegranates, still firm and green, promising sweetness in a season yet to come. Then you turn toward the next row of trees, ready to follow the gardeners deeper into their world. Because once you've tasted the calm of these hushed rituals, you never quite let go. You step off the main pathway and feel the ground subtly shift beneath your sandals, each grain of soil telling its own story. Just beyond the row of miniature peaches, gardeners kneel beside tidy mounds of earth, their calloused hands working in near silence. You crouch low, noticing the fine-textured soil, dark, loamy, and crumbly, carefully blended to hold moisture without becoming waterlogged. It's a mainstream historical fact that Ottoman gardeners often mix clay loam with decomposed animal manure and crushed oyster shells to optimize drainage and nutrient content in palace gardens. A gardener taps a gentle rhythm on the soil with the flat of his hand, loosening the surface crust before kneading tiny pebbles and powdered lime into the mix. You feel the vibration through your fingertips as you lean forward, curiosity guiding you. In this early morning rite, each mound transforms from a simple heap of dirt into a miniature sacred plot, ready to cradle budding roots. The gardeners believe these rituals honor the life force hidden in the earth, a tradition inherited from Seljuk horticultural manuals brought to Anatolia centuries earlier. You recognize the low chant rising among the workers, words so soft you can barely discern them. They murmur blessings to the soil, thanks for warmth, gratitude for fertility, and apologies for the cuts to come. This whispering feels like an echo of ancient Sufi teachings, where nature and spirit intertwine. As you listen, the chant fades into the gentle susurrus of silk robes brushing stone, reminding you of the palace's opulent halls just beyond these tranquil groves. Here's a quirky detail you wouldn't expect. Some gardeners sprinkle finely ground coffee grounds around the base of each mound, believing that the caffeine will stimulate microbial life and fend off fungal spores. You inhale the faint bitterness mixing with the earthy aroma, and for a moment, it's as if you're standing inside an Ottoman cafe rather than a royal orchard. A slender channel of water trickles beside you, its surface disturbed only by the occasional ripple from a falling leaf. The gardeners dip small wooden ladles into the stream, then pour the water slowly over each mound in a circular motion, mimicking the flow of rivers that once traversed Anatolia. Each pour is deliberate, measured, either too much to wash away the topsoil, nor too little to leave roots parched. You follow the glistening droplets, your eyes tracing their path as they disappear into the earth. You remember how, just moments ago, you watched a gardener seal a fresh pruning cut with clay dust and rosewater. Now you see how that same rosewater appears again, this time mixed into the soil itself, infusing the earth with a delicate scent that lingers on your fingertips. It's as if every element in this grove, water, soil, plant, and scent, participates in a silent conversation about balance and harmony. A nearby pair of gardeners exchange hushed advice on soil pH, using ceramic test strips splashed with vinegar and lime water. Their quiet debate reminds you that science and superstition often blend here. A pinch of empirical testing alongside protective amulets hung on young trees to ward off jinn. You lean closer and spot a tiny silver talisman carved with Quranic verses, nestled next to a root ball. Under the trellis's soft glow, the morning sun traces golden patterns across the mounds, highlighting the precision of their shapes, each one slightly domed, like a miniature hill crowned with budding life. You run a fingertip along the crest of a mound and feel a subtle warmth, evidence of microbial activity bustling just below. Without a word, the gardener beside you nods, acknowledging that you've taken part in this rite by simply bearing witness. As the chants dissolve, the gardeners switch to the next phase, hand raking the surface until the topsoil resembles velvet. You watch how they use bamboo rakes no wider than your hand, each time gliding across the earth to break up any tiny clumps. The sound is soft and even, a lullaby for the grove itself. You close your eyes and let the repetition soothe you, your breath aligning with the rake's gentle swish. At the far end of the row, a master gardener kneels before a particularly immaculate mound, its rim decorated with a ring of crushed rose petals. He carefully presses a tiny seedling into the center, then covers its delicate roots with a pinch of soil. You lean in so close you could almost taste the earth's musk. The gardener offers you a handful of petals and invites you to scatter them along the pathway as an act of blessing. You oblige, and the petals' soft thud against the ground feels like nature's own applause. As the sun inches higher, the gardeners rise slowly, brushing dirt from their robes. You stand too, stretching to relieve the chill that lingered in the morning shade. Around you, the grove breathes, a living tapestry of soil rituals performed generation after generation. You realize that these mounds aren't just practical, they're performances, choreographed by centuries of botanical wisdom and cultural reverence. You glance back at the main pathway and recall the pomegranate buds from before. Each bud, each mound, is part of a greater design, an intricate dance of earth, water, tool, and hand. You feel grounded, connected to a continuum of caretakers whose hands shape the very soil you stand on. With a final look at the neat rows of mounds, you follow a slender irrigation channel toward the next ritual station. The promise of more secrets and sensory whispers propels you forward. After all, once you've learned to hear the soil's quiet voice, you'll never hear ordinary dirt the same way again. You leave the fragrant soil mounds behind and follow a narrow side path lined with miniature apricot trees. Their pale blossoms drift down like confetti, carpeting the ground beneath your feet. A soft breeze carries the sweet, almond-leaning aroma up to your nose, and you pause, closing your eyes for a breath, letting the scent settle into your senses. You feel drawn forward by a distant clang, metal on stone, echoing from a small open pavilion draped with vine-woven trellises. As you step inside, the light shifts, glinting off a row of knives laid out on a low wooden bench. Each one is no longer than your palm, its blades slender and curved like a crescent moon. You reach out and pick up the first. The steel is cool against your fingertips. And you feel its gentle weight, a balance so precise it seems almost alive in your hand. It's a mainstream historical fact that Ottoman gardeners prized Damascus steel for its unique ability to hold an ultra-fine edge, allowing the tiniest bud or twig to be cut with surgical precision. You notice intricate patterns etched into the blade's surface, whorls and lines that ripple like water caught in sunlight. These aren't merely decorative, they're the byproduct of layering iron and steel during forging, a technique perfected by master smiths in the 16th century. You run your thumb along a wavy pattern and imagine the smith's hammer striking the metal, each blow folding the layers again and again, creating that distinctive watered appearance. A gardener beside you explains, voice hushed. These knives are called bikak, the delicate blades. You nod, marveling at how something meant to sever life can be crafted with such artistry. He lifts a second knife, its handle wrapped in fine leather dyed deep aubergine. The contrast of the dark wrap against the gleaming blade makes it look like a dagger fit for a sultan's waist rather than a gardener's tool. Here's a quirky detail. Some blades were inlaid with tiny notches shaped like stylized tulips, signifying the owner's devotion to both gardening and calligraphy, since the word for tulip in Ottoman Turkish, layl, also appeared frequently in poetic manuscripts. You angle the knife under the pavilion's diffused light and spot one such notch, carved so small you almost miss it. It's like discovering a hidden signature in a painting, an intimate secret that ties blade to owner. You tap the blade gently on a wet stone slab set into the pavilion's stone floor. A soft, rhythmic grinding sound fills the air, and you lean close to watch whirls of fine metal dust collect in the stone's grooves. The gardener uses a thin slurry of water to carry away the particles, and you notice how he clenches his jaw, his focus absolute. It's as if every stroke of the blade against the stone is a prayer, refining metal just as the orchard refines life itself. Picking up another knife, you feel a surge of connection, a centuries-old lineage of craftsmen and caretakers passing knowledge from hand to hand. Mainstream historical accounts tell us that palace gardens employed specialized metalworkers whose sole task was to maintain and sharpen every tool used in the grounds, ensuring peak performance at dawn each day. The pavilion's walls are perforated with narrow windows, each framed by latticed wooden panels that filter the morning sun into delicate stripes of light. Those stripes dance across a third knife, its handle fashioned from olive wood polished to a soft sheen. You smell the faint, earthy tang of the wood and run your fingers along its length, feeling every subtle grain. The handle curves gently, fitting into your palm like a bespoke glove. Then the gardener leans closer and whispers a fringe tidbit. Legend has it that some blades were briefly soaked in a secret infusion of pomegranate rind and rose oil before forging, believed to imbue the steel with the garden's very essence, so that every cut would carry a whisper of floral sweetness. You blink at him, uncertain if he's testing you, but a quick glance at an old scroll tucked beneath the whetstone confirms that at least a handful of blades bore inscriptions hinting at unusual forging materials. You set the knife down reverently and notice a small bowl of fine oil next to a lined cloth. The gardener dips a swab into the oil and smears it gently across each blade, ensuring none of the metal will rust when not in use. He hands you the cloth and invites you to join. As you wipe down a blade, you feel each ridge and bevel, your movements slow and deliberate, almost meditative. Outside, the breeze picks up, rustling the trellis vines overhead. You pause your oiling to watch sunbeams scuttle across the pavilion floor, illuminating a fourth knife with an ivory handle carved into the shape of a coiled snake. The head curves outward, its forked tongue elegantly half-extended in perpetual motion. You pick it up and trace the delicate scales, a marvel of artistry. The gardener chuckles softly, a gift from a visiting dignitary, far more ornamental than practical, but we polish it anyway. You laugh, imagining a high-ranking envoy presenting a snake-handled knife at a garden ceremony. It seems absurd, but then again, nothing here is quite ordinary. The ornamental blade sits beside a practical one, a reminder that in Ottoman courts, functionality and display often walked hand in hand. You rise and hold up the knives, arranging them in a fan before you. The blades catch the filtered light, scattering tiny rainbows across the pavilion walls. The grind of a far-off wheel punctuates the moment, as another gardener wheels in a wooden chest. He opens it with a creak, revealing velvet-lined slots each housing a final collection of tools, miniaturized pruning shears, slender grafting knives, and even a delicate pair of tweezers for coaxing rogue shoots. Your eyes widen as you reach for the tweezers, so narrow they resemble the antennae of an insect. You pick them up and feel the slight spring in the joint. Use these for the tiniest tasks, the gardener advises. A hairline slip here, and you could nick the bark and compromise an entire branch. As you test the tweezers, you're struck by how every tool, no matter how small, demands respect. The artistry of steel, the precision of forging, and the centuries of accumulated expertise all converge in these blades. You place them back and exhale, feeling your mind slow in harmony with the grove's unhurried pace. Before you leave, the head gardener hands you a wooden box just your size and places one of the delicate blades inside, cushioned by silk. Take this memory with you, he says, eyes twinkling. You clasp the box, its weight tangible in your palm, and tuck it safely beneath your arm. Stepping out of the pavilion, you feel the cool air of the orchard envelop you again. Behind you, the knives rest in their box, like silent guardians of the grove, ready to carve life into blossoming branches. You turn toward a cluster of miniature pomegranates, their shiny green fruit nodding as if in greeting. You lift the wooden box and follow a sunlit path toward the next station, where petals await your touch and blossoms beg for trimming. You wander down a shaded corridor where the orchard opens into a tapestry of tiny trees, each proudly displaying its miniature bounty. To your right, a row of peach saplings stands so close together you could almost touch each blossom's velvety surface with outstretched fingertips. You step between them, careful not to brush against the delicate petals. Their soft pink hue glows in the golden light, and you imagine biting into the flesh, tasting a perfect sweetness no larger than a grape. These little peach trees are descendants of varieties originally brought from Central Asia by zealous royal gardeners eager to cultivate the perfect fruit. It's a mainstream historical fact that the Ottomans imported hundreds of peach cultivars from the Persian courts, experimenting with grafts and cross-pollination to create dozens of specialty types, some prized more for fragrance than size. Here, they took that practice to an extreme, coaxing each tree to fruit in miniature form, like living jewels in the palace's crown. As you move deeper, you notice slim tags tied to branches with silk cord, bearing elegant Ottoman script. One tag reads Yusuf's Moonlight Peach, a cultivar named after a court poet whose verses hailed the fruit's fragrance. You lean in to sniff the blossoms, picking up a faint hint of almond and citrus, almost like the perfume swirling in an imperial harem. Overhead, a trellis supports a line of dwarf apricot trees, their golden blooms clustered in tight, cheerful bunches. Each apricot sits no larger than a marble, and you spot a gardener gently shaking a branch to release a single ripe piece into a polished copper bowl. He hands it to you with a grin. Try it, just one. You pop it in your mouth, and a burst of tangy sweet juice glides across your tongue like liquid sunshine. You swallow and exhale slowly, tasting something more complex than ordinary apricot. There's a slight hint of almond again, a whisper of honey you never knew existed. Here's a quirky detail. Some cultivators swore that whispering poetry to the trees during blossoming increased both flavor and aroma, though whether that's myth or method remains debatable. You peer at the blossoms and imagine a gardener reciting lines of gentle verse at dawn, hoping the words would coax more nectar into every fruit. A narrow channel weaves through the display, reflecting dappled light like fractured glass. Along its banks, pomegranate saplings arch gracefully, their buds swollen with promise. You trail a finger along a branch until you find a tiny pomegranate, its skin still smooth and pale green. A gardener kneels beside you, offering a slender knife to make a neat slit so you can see inside. You slice casually and find the seeds within are perfect rubies, each a droplet of concentrated flavor. You recall that pomegranates were a symbol of fertility and abundance in Ottoman culture, often depicted in palace frescoes and ceramics. The mainstream historical fact is that royalty prized pomegranate groves for their beauty and symbolic power, and miniature versions served as living talismans in private chambers. You imagine a sultan wandering here during evening hours, plucking a tiny seed to ward off bad dreams. Beyond the pomegranates, you discover a surprising newcomer, a cluster of quince saplings shaped into spirals, their pale yellow blooms releasing a tart perfume that tickles your nose. You didn't expect quince in miniature form, but in the Ottoman passion for novelty, almost anything was possible. A gardener explains that this cultivar was a later addition, inspired by a visiting ambassador's exotic quince from the Caucasus that tasted like apple and pear combined. You wander past more peach varieties, one with blossoms so white they're nearly translucent, another with leaves edged in deep purple that shimmer in the sunlight. Each tree wears a paper tag identifying its lineage: Tavsin Kalak, rabbit's ear, for its long, narrow fruit, and Altan Sakim, golden cluster, for its densely packed buds. You murmur the names under your breath, fascinated by how language and horticulture intertwine here. A sudden breeze rustles the canopy above, and you glance up to see grapevines twisting overhead, their miniature grapes promising yet another surprise. But before you can follow that trail, a gardener beckons you toward a small stone alcove where rare seed packets rest in a glass case. He opens it, revealing hand-lettered envelopes filled with dried seeds from legendary cultivars, apricots once exclusively grown for the Sultan's private breakfast, pomegranates with deeper crimson hues reserved for palace banquets, and peaches that bloom twice a year under precise care. You pick up an envelope marked serene, cool dream, and hold it close, imagining the cool shade under which its blossoms once opened. The seed's promise seems almost poetic, a tiny capsule containing the genetic memory of sweet days long past. You thumb the flap closed and tuck the packet into your robe, deciding you'll plant it in your own garden someday, carrying the palace's legacy into your backyard. Behind the glass case, a tiny bell rings, an unexpected lilt that breaks the reverie. A gardener motions for you to follow the fresh irrigation channel that branches here, pointing toward a grouping of citrus saplings you nearly missed. You step carefully over pebbles to reach them, finding miniature lemon and orange trees whose glossy leaves glint like mirrors. Each fruit perches on the branch like a drop of sunlight. You pluck a tiny lemon, so small you nearly mistake it for a decorative bead, and study its smooth rind. Under your fingertips, you feel the faint bumps of oil glands that would release zest under a gentle scrape. You imagine zesting one of these lemons for a royal dessert, an indulgence so rare it might rival the finest sweets from Constantinople's famous patisseries. As you drift onward, you notice the orchard's floor is unusually clear, without fallen fruit or stray branches. Everything here is meticulously curated. Even shadows seem to pause and stay within their appointed shapes. You realize the procession of diminutive fruits forms a living gallery, each tree a portrait of botanical history. Each fruit a delicate brushstroke. Your shoelaces loosen, and you feel your shoulders relax. Surrounded by so much careful cultivation and so many stories embedded in each blossom and fruit, you sense the world beyond the orchard fade into insignificance. You've walked through centuries of horticultural innovation, from Persian grafting tables to palace conservatories, all distilled into this intimate space. You pause at the end of the grove and turn in a slow circle, naming each variety in your mind: Yusuf's moonlight peach, golden cluster apricot, royal crimson pomegranate, cool dream quince, each a whisper of history. Then you step toward a shaded rest spot where petals drift like tiny butterflies. Ready for the next act. You settle onto a woven mat, feeling the gentle weight of the orchard's legacy settle around you, and prepare to discover the water whisperers who keep this delicate parade alive. You rise from the woven mat and follow a slender water channel that glints like molten silver under the morning sun. Every step you take echoes softly across the stone slabs lining the channel's edge, and you can't help but notice how the water's surface shimmers in constant motion, as if alive. The channel splits into multiple finger-thin streams, each guided precisely between the orchard rows to nourish every miniature tree with equal care. You kneel beside one of the narrower conduits and dip a fingertip into the cool flow. It feels silky smooth, carrying just a hint of mineral tang that speaks of distant springs and mountain snowmelt. It's a mainstream historical fact that the Ottoman palace gardens employed intricate gravity-fed irrigation systems, known as sezam havuzları, designed to deliver water from the palace's grand fountains directly into hidden channels woven throughout the orchards. You notice small sluice gates carved from marble slabs, each no larger than a foot long. A gardener lifts one with a gentle tug, and you watch as the stream's volume shifts, the water either pooling in a semicircle basin or rushing forward in a lively ribbon. He explains that adjusting each gate is a daily ritual, ensuring the perfect amount of water reaches each root zone. Too much, and the soil would suffocate; too little, and the delicate twigs would shrivel. Here's a quirky detail: gardeners sometimes floated shards of porous lava rock in the channels, believing the tiny vesicles would aerate the water and keep fish safe from stagnant pockets. You peer into the channel and spot one such rock. Its pitted surface dotted with algae like miniature craters on a moon. You reach in and fish it out, feeling its light weight, and let it rest in your palm as you continue upstream. You follow the channel to a slightly wider basin lined with blue and white isnic tiles depicting stylized waves and lotus blossoms. The basin's shallow depth makes every ripple visible, and you trace the patterns as they converge and diverge. A gardener stands nearby with a copper dipper, checking the water's clarity and temperature. He hands you the dipper and invites you to taste the water, an invitation you accept, sipping the cool liquid that leaves a crisp, almost sweet aftertaste. The gardener explains that water temperature was crucial, cold enough to invigorate the roots, but not so frigid as to shock them. He recounts how some streams were shaded by living pergolas, where grapevines overhead filtered sunlight and kept the water's warmth within a precise range. You look up to see those vines curling above and realize that every element here, from trellis to tile, works in harmony to regulate microclimates within the grove. You wander to a small alcove where a basin shaped like a crescent moon cradles a few goldfish, their scales flashing like embers beneath the water's surface. Watching them dart between submerged stones is mesmerizing. Their presence does more than delight the eye. It's a mainstream historical fact that fish were used in Ottoman gardens to control mosquito larvae, keeping the water channels both beautiful and functional. Leaning over the basin, you spot a tiny fountain sprouting from a carved marble fish head. Water jets up in a soft arc and falls back with a gentle hiss, creating concentric ripples that spread until they meet the basin's edges. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the fountain's rhythm become a lullaby. The gardener whispers that in the hottest months, the fountain's spray cooled the surrounding air by a few precious degrees, an unspoken luxury for those fortunate enough to wander here at midday. You trace the channel further, arriving at a series of micro-reservoirs where water pools momentarily before trickling onward. Each reservoir is topped with a fine mesh of copper wire, carefully designed to catch leaves and debris without slowing the flow. The gardener shows you how they clean the mesh daily, using tiny brushes to sweep away any detritus before it clogs the system. You help him lift the mesh and reveal a perfectly clear pool beneath, undisturbed except for the occasional dart of a fish. Here's another fringe tidbit. Some gardeners believed adding a pinch of ground eggshell to the mesh trays every fortnight helped boost calcium levels in the water, reducing the risk of fungal diseases in the saplings. You feel the softened grit of crushed shell on your finger, and imagine its microparticles dissolving into the stream, quietly feeding the trees. You follow an ascending incline where the channel narrows into a marble aqueduct, its sides etched with poetic inscriptions praising the unity of earth and water. The aqueduct carries the remaining flow toward the grove's far end, where overflow channels return excess water to the palace fountains in a continuous loop. You imagine the architects mapping every incline and drop with mathematical precision, balancing form and function in perfect synergy. You pause beside a gardener adjusting a small valve made of bronze, its handle shaped like a crescent moon. With a gentle twist, he diverts a trickle into an overhead sprinkler carved into a vine motif. The water sprays downward in a fine mist, dappling the miniature leaves like morning dew. You step under the spray, feeling the cool mist settle on your skin, refreshing you as surely as it nourishes the trees. As you stand soaked in tiny droplets, you recall how the palace engineers prized such innovations, recording every water feature in illustrated manuscripts. These systems showcase the empire's mastery over nature, transforming simple springs into symphonies of flow and sound. You rise from the damp stone and follow the last stretch of channel, emerging near a circular pool ringed with dwarf citrus trees. Their glossy leaves gleam, droplets clinging to every surface. You dip your hand into the pool and feel the last trickle of water slip through your fingers as it returns to the fountains beyond. You step back and survey the entire waterway, silver ribbons weaving between miniature orchards, fountains whispering, fish dancing, and gates controlling every flow. You inhale deeply, tasting the steam that lingers in the morning air, and sense your own thoughts slow to match the water's unhurried path. Historians still debate the extent to which these irrigation marvels influenced later European garden designs, questioning how much knowledge truly flowed beyond the empire's borders. You follow a shaded gravel path flanked by slender cypress hedges until you arrive at a simple wooden platform tucked beneath a trellis of jasmine vines. On this platform, a circle of 11 palace gardeners stands barefoot, each holding a tiny pruning knife sheathed in soft leather. You step forward to join them, heart pounding as you realize you're about to witness something seldom shared outside these walls: the royal gardener's oath. The eldest gardener, his silvered beard tucked neatly into his vest, raises his knife high. You notice the blade's faint curve and the delicate inlay of vine patterns along its spine, a hallmark of tools reserved for oath ceremonies. It's a mainstream historical fact that during imperial service, Ottoman palace gardeners swore loyalty oaths in private rituals, binding them to silence and unwavering care of the sultan's gardens. He clears his throat, and you hear a soft murmur ripple through the circle. The oath begins: "I promise, by the breath of every bloom and the stretch of every root, to tend these orchards with unwavering devotion. I shall cut with precision, neither too deep nor too shallow, ensuring life flows in every branch. I will guard the soil from poison and pest, from drought and decay. I vow to honor every tree as I honor the Sultan, in wordless service beneath heaven's gaze." As the words settle, each gardener touches the tip of his knife to his palm, drawing a tiny drop of blood that glistens in the dappled light. You wince, but the gesture feels less a wound and more a pact, sealing their promise in something as fleeting and vital as a dewdrop. The blood is pressed onto a folded leaf, then scattered into the gravel, returned to the earth as an offering. The eldest gardener then steps forward, his voice softer now. "We stand not just as caretakers of trees, but stewards of legacy," he says. "The Sultan's peace blooms in these groves, our hands shape that peace." You glance around at the bowed heads, each face serene, focused. You realize that this oath is not mere formality, but a binding vow tied to centuries of tradition. The act of swearing by soil and sap transcends words, becoming a living contract between human and nature. After the final incantation, the gardeners sheath their knives and sit cross-legged in a tight circle. A younger gardener produces a small brass brazier filled with fragrant charcoal and sprinkles a handful of dried lavender and rosemary onto it. The smoke curls upward like prayer ribbons, filling the air with a calming scent. You inhale deeply, the herb's cool tones settling in your chest. In this fragrant haze, the gardeners share quiet smiles and nods of mutual respect. You sense they've reaffirmed not just their duty, but their camaraderie, the unspoken bond of those who shaped living things. Someone hands you a folded piece of silk, embroidered with a single pomegranate blossom. You open it to find a tiny booklet of handwritten instructions, pruning rhythms for every season, Watergate schedules, pest rituals, and seed-saving notes. It's the Naimet name, the gift of knowledge. You slip the booklet into your robe pocket, feeling its weight and potential. The gardeners rise and move toward a cluster of dwarf cherry trees waiting for the day's first cuts. They don their leather aprons and distribute tools. You stand to the side as they take their positions, the solemnity of the oath lingering like a sacred echo. You remember the line about honoring every tree as the Sultan. It resonates more deeply now. Each snip, each tied branch, each whispered chant is a continuation of this oath. The gardeners exchange a final glance, breathe in unison, and begin pruning the cherry saplings with synchronized precision, as though guided by an invisible conductor. You step back from the platform and watch the gardeners work, realizing that their promise is not just to trees but to time itself. The Sultan's legacy grows in rings of wood, each year meticulously documented in the pages of the Naimet name. You tuck your hands behind your back and lean forward to observe the rhythm of their blades, trusting that this vow will carry the groves through ages yet to come. You slip away from the solemn oath and wander toward a nook of the orchard where the air hums with unseen life. Tiny clusters of blossoms, white, pink, and pale yellow, brush against one another, their petals trembling as winged visitors flit in and out. You pause beneath a miniature apricot and watch a bright green aphid cluster along the twig. Their tiny bodies glisten like dew pearls, sucking sap with stealthy efficiency. Your skin prickles at the thought of invasion, but just beyond, a scarlet ladybug crawls into view, its spotted shell a beacon of hope. Gardeners have long known that not all creatures here are enemies, some are invaluable allies. You recall it's a mainstream historical fact that Ottoman horticulturists welcomed certain insects, ladybugs, lacewings, predatory beetles, to combat sap-sucking pests naturally, reducing the need for harsh remedies. Here, they introduced these guardians into the microgrove, releasing them by the hundreds at dawn to patrol the branches. You watch as the ladybug twists its head, sinks its mandibles into a nearby aphid, and flicks the empty husk aside. You follow the slow exodus of more ladybugs as they fan out across the blossoms. Their red shells flash in the sunlight, each movement precise, like tiny knights riding gleaming steeds to battle. You kneel, cup your hands, and gently gather a handful, 12 little warriors, to relocate them to a more infested branch. You whisper encouragement, half joking that they'd make excellent bodyguards for a sultan's favorite blossom. Nearby, a gardener kneels by a cluster of pomegranate saplings, flicking a small brush over a leaf. The bristles disturb a cluster of scale insects, their waxy shells clinging stubbornly to the veins. The gardener's brush strokes are deliberate, each flaxen bristle sweeping away tiny invaders without bruising the delicate foliage. You reach out to help, feeling the satisfying pop as the insects detach, falling into a waiting basket. But nature doesn't rely solely on these cooperative partnerships. As you stand, you notice a flash of iridescent green, a long-legged beetle known for its voracious appetite for grubs. You bend down and watch it tilt its head, using its curved mandibles to dig into the soil beneath your fingertips. Fragments of decaying wood and earth fly in miniature arcs as it hunts for hidden larvae. It's a quirky detail that some gardeners even fed these beetles bits of dried meat to ensure they remained vigorous predators. You crouch and admire the beetle's armored exoskeleton before gently placing it atop a mound next to a flowering cherry graft. Your gaze drifts to a tiny patch of flowers planted specifically to attract pollinators, violets, marigolds, and chamomile, each barely larger than a coin. Their pungent scents mingle with the orchard's broader perfume, luring in bees with their promise of nectar. You watch a small honeybee hover, its legs dusted with bright yellow pollen sacs, then dart from blossom to blossom in a zigzag ballet. Mainstream historical records describe how Ottoman royal apiaries supplied hives with specially grown flowers for orchard pollination, a practice mirrored here on a miniature scale to guarantee bountiful fruit set. You reach for a bloom and gently hold it as a bee lands, its wings humming like a hummingbird's. You feel a soft tickle against your skin as it gathers nectar, and you marvel at how this tiny creature carries on its back the pollen that will become next season's fruit. You slide the blossom free and let the bee lift off, watching it disappear among the branches until it's just a golden speck dancing in sunlight. Beyond these cooperative insects, you notice darker signs of strife, patches of brown where leaves have withered from fungal infection, and tiny holes in petals gnawed by caterpillars. A group of gardeners gathers around a small bowl of smoked pine chips, their hands fanning the fragrant smoke into the canopy. This centuries-old remedy, a fringe tidbit whispered among gardeners, relies on the wood's resinous properties to repel moth larvae and mildew alike. You bring your face close and inhale the smoky pine aroma, earthy and slightly sweet, a scent that lingers beneath the orchard's floral notes. The gardener hands you a slender tube of gauze filled with crushed garlic and hot pepper flakes. He explains that they hang these sachets from branches as a natural deterrent, the pungent fumes keeping away some pests without harming beneficial insects. You tie a sachet beneath a tender blossom, noting the irony that something so everyday in a modern kitchen serves as an ancient botanical shield here. As you move on, you notice a small wooden box labeled Beneficials in calligraphic script. Inside, you find compartments containing tiny bottles of powdered diatomaceous earth, winged lacewings cocooned in silk pouches, and a handful of predatory mites. The head gardener explains that these items are distributed according to a weekly schedule, dusting soil edges or gently opening cages to release new predators. You take a mite container and sprinkle a few onto a cluster of sickly buds, imagining them crawling out to hunt their prey. You stand back and watch as the orchard's ecosystem adjusts, predators chasing pests, pollinators flitting to blooms, and gardeners orchestrating the balance. Each insect, whether friend or foe, plays a role in this living tapestry. You feel a shiver of awe at the complexity vibrating within such a small space. Above you, the trellis vines creak as a breeze stirs, carrying petals and leaves like tiny dancers on a stage. A gardener whispers that on special occasions they release caged butterflies over the orchard. The spectacle of colored wings against green foliage was said to delight visiting dignitaries. You imagine the fluttering wings and gentle gasps of amazement echoing in the pavilion halls beyond. You kneel before a fallen leaf, its edges dotted with microscopic mites that feed on algae. But here's a quirky tidbit. The gardeners cultivate a friendly strain of these mites, believing their algae grazing keeps the bark clean and disease-free. You pick up the leaf, brush the mites onto a healthy branch, and watch them disappear into bark crevices. Your senses reel at the sheer interconnectedness, every rustle, buzz, and hum contributing to the orchard's vitality. You lean forward and cup your hands around a small cluster of buds, feeling the vibration of a hidden insect marching through its microscopic world. In this silent symphony of life and decay, you realize that even the smallest creature can tip the balance between abundance and blight. As you stand, brushing dirt from your clothes, the gardeners step past you toward a shaded pavilion for their afternoon tea. You follow, heart light, carrying with you the memory of ladybug armies and vigilant beetles. Ahead lies the next ritual, coaxing delicate blossoms open through precise trimming, a stage where human hands and insect allies together decide which blooms will become tomorrow's tiny fruits. The late afternoon light slants low, throwing gold across the orchard, turning dew into sparkles and shadows into delicate ink strokes across the paths. You follow the gardeners toward a particularly fragrant row of quince trees, each one barely shoulder high, yet bursting with creamy blossoms and tightly furrowed buds waiting for the perfect moment to open. This is the hour of coaxing, when gardeners, shears in hand and patience in their bones, move gently from branch to persuade each tree to bloom at just the right pace. Not too fast, or the petals will wither in shock. Not too slow, or the fruit will miss its window. It's part horticulture, part whispered negotiation. You kneel next to a tree and observe as an elderly gardener, her sleeves rolled and fingers stained with resin, examines a blossom cluster. She pinches one off entirely, snipping just below the node. Then another. Then one she leaves alone, nodding softly as though the tree had passed the test. You lean in, trying to spot what she sees. Some buds are bold, she murmurs, some just pretending. You wonder if she's half serious. It's a mainstream historical fact that Ottoman gardeners, especially those trained in the palace grounds, practiced selective bud thinning to ensure that only the healthiest blooms bore fruit. This controlled abundance was especially important in miniature orchards, where space was tight and each tree's output was monitored with borderline obsession. One misstep, a branch with too many blooms left unchecked, could result in small, flavorless fruits or even breakage under weight. So here, buds are not merely flowers, they're additions. Each gardener evaluates texture, color, symmetry, and the springiness of the calyx with the focus of a jeweler inspecting uncut stones. You try it yourself, reach toward a cluster of soft pink buds, gently wiggle the largest one, and are surprised when it falls into your hand with a single soft tug. Its center is brown. A bad sign. The gardener beside you gives a satisfied nod. You're learning. A little further on, a younger gardener employs a fringe technique involving a small, hand-blown glass bell. He fits it over certain buds to amplify heat, encouraging slightly early blooming. Helps with staggered fruiting, he says. And it's fun to see them open like secrets. You kneel and peer through the bell. Inside, moisture gathers like tiny stars on the interior, refracting sunlight into sparkles over the tightly curled blossom. You feel like you're watching a miniature sunroom, custom built for a flower. Some blossoms, too stubborn to open despite warmth and whispering, are sung to. Yes, sung to. A low hum, more vibration than melody, passes from gardener to branch in a tradition that toes the line between superstition and performance art. You close your eyes and listen to the tone, feel it through your ribcage, and imagine the petals stirring in response, lulled into unfolding. As you wander down the row, you stumble on something truly unexpected, an antique scroll laid out on a low bench. It's a sort of seasonal blossom chart, drawn in watercolor, tracking which trees are due to bloom, when, and how vigorously. You trace your finger along the tiny dots and lines, each one a record of a gardener's intuition. Some entries include short notes like "too proud" or "needs song," scribbled in flowing Ottoman script. One gardener catches you squinting at the scroll and chuckles. Some trees, he says, just need compliments. You raise an eyebrow, but he explains that for decades, perhaps centuries, the staff have named individual trees and recorded how they respond to different styles of attention. A quince named Gulbahar, for instance, prefers praise, while a particular fig sapling nicknamed Hassan opens only when ignored. Whether botanical psychology or old habit, you find yourself testing the idea, whispering, "You're doing so well, sweetheart," to a shy-looking bud. Moments later, it opens. You blink. Coincidence? Perhaps. But the gardener sees your stunned face and just grins knowingly, offering no further explanation. As the coaxing continues, petals begin to drop from some trees, tiny confetti dancing down onto mossy stones. One gardener collects them reverently, pressing select ones between rice paper pages inside a wooden folio. You glance over his shoulder to see petals sorted by color, date, and tree of origin. You learn that these are saved to make scented parchment for palace correspondence. An apricot blossom from today might perfume a letter that travels across empires. Just beyond the blossom chart, a gardener snips a half-open bud and crushes it gently between his fingers, releasing a sharp, green note that smells like lemon and soap. "Too sour," he says. "Not ready." He offers it to you, and you sniff it, nose wrinkling. He's right. You move to the fig section, where a different approach is used. Instead of coaxing, gardeners here cover branches with lace cloths, filtering sunlight like a gentle veil. This slows the blooming, stretching it over several days. The cloth is stitched with tiny silver charms, moon shapes, stars, and the occasional tulip. It's an aesthetic as much as a tactic. A gardener tells you some believe certain shapes encourage calm growth. Crescent moons soothe figs, she adds, with the same shrug people use when recommending herbal tea for stress. Historians still debate whether these symbolic gardening charms truly influenced plant behavior or simply reflected deeper cultural rituals. A sudden gust of wind shakes the trees, and petals burst into the air like soft rain. You instinctively reach out, catching 3 in your palm. One is perfectly intact, its edges curled in a delicate spiral. You slip it into your sleeve, a small keepsake from the day's bloom coaxing. At day's end, a soft bell rings from the far edge of the orchard, signaling the end of pruning and the beginning of watering rituals. The gardeners begin gathering their tools, tucking shears into belts and folding their blossom charts. You linger by the last quince tree, watching as its final bud opens slowly in the golden light. No shears, no singing, no coaxing at all. Just a moment of quiet, and a little bit of time. Evening drapes the orchard in soft amber, as the gardeners drift silently toward the watering station, a low marble basin at the center of a tiled courtyard framed by miniature citrus trees. You follow, your fingers still dusted with petal powder, the smell of blossoms clinging gently to your sleeves. The tiles underfoot are cool now, their blue and green mosaics shaped like curling vines and tiny rain clouds. There's a hush over the space, like the orchard itself is holding its breath. Watering, in this corner of the Ottoman palace gardens, is not a task. It's a slow, almost ceremonial act, one that speaks of restraint, rhythm, and reverence. You watch as a gardener dips a long-handled brass ladle into the basin. He lifts it carefully, tips it slightly, and lets the water trickle down in a delicate stream onto the roots of a lemon tree barely waist-high. He waits, counts under his breath, then repeats the process. No spraying, no flooding, no rushing. This is watering by persuasion, not force. It's a mainstream historical fact that Ottoman palace gardeners developed intricate water management techniques, often based on a blend of Persian-inspired irrigation and localized innovations suited to Istanbul's climate. Here, those traditions are scaled down, adapted to these tiny groves where overwatering would rot delicate root structures and underwatering would stunt fruit. You can almost hear the soil sigh as each ladle's worth sinks in. One gardener lets you try. You kneel beside a miniature orange tree, dip the brass ladle into the basin, and find that it's surprisingly heavy. The water trembles at the edge as you tip it, missing your target completely and splashing onto your sandal. A nearby gardener chuckles softly. Even water prefers direction, he says. You try again, slower this time, and watch the stream fall in a perfect line onto the base of the tree, darkening the earth like ink on parchment. As night deepens, other watering tools appear, slender clay jugs, wrapped in cloth to keep them cool, copper spoons, and your favorite, a soft pouch made of goat hide, pierced with a single pinhole. When filled and suspended above a root cluster, it drips steadily for hours. You're told it's used for the orchard's most delicate trees, figs and cherries in bloom, or stressed saplings recovering from pruning. It's a fringe tidbit that these hides were sometimes soaked in herbal tea before use, infusing the water with calming properties that, according to old gardeners' lore, soothe not only trees but the soil itself. You linger by one such pouch now, gently swinging in the breeze like a sleeping bat. Drop by drop, it feeds a sapling whose bark was recently scalded by an early heat wave. You run your fingers along its trunk, smooth, cool, a little damp, and marvel at how tenderly this garden treats injury. Then, from the edge of the courtyard, a quiet shuffling sound draws your attention. Two gardeners emerge carrying a large clay amphora capped with silk netting. Inside, you catch glimpses of faint movement, ripples in water, darting shapes. As they pour it gently into the basin, you see the source, tiny fish, no longer than a thumb, now swimming in slow circles. These are gambusia, a hardy breed introduced centuries ago to palace water features not just for charm, but to eat mosquito larvae and keep the water fresh. You watch one glide past a floating quince blossom, its movement barely disturbing the surface. You lean in close, and for a moment, everything else fades, the quiet drip of water, the rustle of leaves, the distant click of sandals on tile. Just you, the blossom, and the fish, coexisting in a delicate, echoing stillness. As you rise and walk along the shaded edges of the orchard, you pass a series of narrow trenches carved like veins through the soil. These, you're told, are part of a hidden channeling system, the Salsabil, designed to mimic mountain streams. It's an ancient water delivery method once reserved for royal gardens. Here, it's scaled down and subtly buried beneath gravel paths, carrying overflow from the central basin to the thirstier edge trees. A small gate opens nearby, and a young apprentice appears carrying a tray of steeped pomegranate peel and boiled chamomile water, an organic tonic made especially for the trees showing signs of leaf curl or mildew. He dips his fingers into the warm bowl and flicks droplets onto the leaves, humming a low, tuneless lullaby. You take the bowl next, mimicking the gesture. As the liquid falls across the soft leaves, the scent of warm fruit and herbs drifts up. It smells like someone else's childhood, nostalgic and unfamiliar at once. Along the outer paths, the gardeners pause at each tree, lay their palms flat over the soil, and wait. They aren't checking moisture. They're checking warmth. According to one of the elders, the soil's temperature, absorbed through the hand, tells more than any moisture meter. Too cool, he murmurs beside a blood orange, means we wait. Warm and dry we water. It's intuition honed over decades, passed down not by book but by quiet habit. Nearby, a quirky tradition continues. A gardener, holding a small bowl filled with lavender-scented water, dips the hem of his robe and flings it gently over the leaves. The droplets scatter like tiny stars, catching moonlight. He insists, half teasing, that it blesses the tree against sudden leaf loss. And it smells better than goat manure, he adds with a smirk. You try it, laughing quietly as your own robe flings water in wide arcs. Overhead, lanterns are being lit, soft yellow glows that hang from poles and tree branches, casting pools of warmth across the garden floor. Insects hover briefly before flitting away. The entire orchard glimmers now, alive but subdued, like a fairy tale setting tucked into the folds of the palace. You move back toward the basin, watching as the last few ladles are poured with utmost precision. Each drop is accounted for, each stream a whisper of care. The orchard, once bustling with the chirps of birds and chatter of gardeners, has quieted. Even the leaves seem to hush under the lantern light. You kneel by the final citrus tree, place your hand flat on the damp earth, and listen, not for sound, but for sensation. The soil pulses softly beneath your fingertips, still cooling from the day's heat. You breathe in the scent of wet bark, sweet petals, and a distant trace of something spicy, clove or nutmeg maybe, clinging to the edge of the breeze. Then a final, unexpected gesture. The gardeners gather around the basin and, one by one, toss in a petal from their sleeve. No words are spoken. The petals float briefly, then settle, drifting lazily toward the fish, who nudge them like blessings. You follow suit. A single pale pink blossom from your pocket. It lands quietly. No splash. Just a soft landing in the garden's quiet heart. The night deepens, and so does the hush over the orchard. You walk slowly now, careful not to disturb the dim quiet that has settled like a silk veil across the miniature groves. The watering has ended. The trees glisten faintly, their trunks darkened with moisture, their leaves twitching softly in the breeze like they're whispering secrets to each other. The gardeners begin their final task of the day, watching. That's right, no trimming, no coaxing, no watering, just watching. It's not passive, though. This is an act of quiet, focused attention, where every rustle, every leaf's angle, every bead of moisture tells a story. You settle beside a small fig tree and mirror the posture of the gardener across from you, legs crossed, spine loose, hands resting lightly on your knees. You feel a little silly at first, like you're waiting for the tree to start talking. But as the minutes pass, you begin to see what they see. A droplet clings to a leaf tip, hesitating before dropping. A cluster of ants patrols a limb, pausing at the base of each bud as if checking its credentials. A faint shimmer in the bark betrays a sapling's effort to seal a nick left by clippers earlier that day. It's a mainstream historical fact that palace horticulturists, especially those trained in the Enderun, the inner palace school, were taught to interpret tree behavior through prolonged observation. They believed that subtle changes in posture, hue, or sap sheen could signal imbalances, much like a physician diagnoses a patient's pulse. And tonight, under the lantern glow, you can almost believe it too. A gardener points toward a row of peach trees. One of them is drooping slightly. Not alarmingly, but enough to notice if you've been watching it every evening for the last month. Too much pride this morning, he murmurs. Gave it too many compliments. You stifle a smile. You're beginning to suspect that this whole operation is part gardening, part improv theater. Nearby, another gardener unfurls a small woven mat and places it beneath a particularly old cherry tree. It's not for him, it's for the tree. Sometimes the roots like warmth, he explains, laying his palm on the mat to test the residual heat it soaked from the sun. They get cold after pruning. A fringe practice, but not unheard of. Fabric blankets for trees, sometimes lightly perfumed with saffron or mint, believed to comfort roots and reduce transplant shock. You gently touch one of these mats, and sure enough, it's warm, almost like a small stove left under the soil. Above, clouds drift lazily past the moon. Light pools in elliptical shapes between the trees. You catch the shadow of a gardener walking slowly with a mirror held at chest level. At first, you think it's a superstition, but he explains it's to catch moonlight and bounce it onto shaded leaves. Some trees miss the moon. We share it with them. You can't help but laugh softly at the idea of moonbeam redistribution, but something about the gesture feels right. Gentle, thoughtful, slightly mad in the most charming way. Historians still debate whether these ritualistic practices, moon mirrors, cloth blankets, and midnight watching, were functional horticultural strategies or spiritual customs meant to heighten the gardener's intimacy with the orchard. The answer, you suspect, is both. There's movement now along the western wall of the orchard. A narrow wooden gate creaks open, revealing a covered walkway lined with latticed windows. Behind it, a series of small rooms where select trees are brought during storms, droughts, or times of royal inspection. These are the convalescent trees, as they're known, trees too precious to be left in the open. A gardener wheels a potted apricot tree into one of these rooms. Its branches have been recently pruned, and you notice tiny strips of silk tied over each cut, almost like bandages. They shimmer faintly in the lantern light. You're told they're soaked in rosewater and vinegar, an old palace remedy to keep wounds clean and discourage pests. You step inside the structure and find yourself in a room filled with soft warmth, the scent of old wood and citrus. The ceiling is high, arched like a Hammam dome, and designed to vent heat during the day while retaining enough to keep the air mild through the night. Along the walls, hooks hold watering tools, jars of powdered bark, sealed scrolls containing bloom records. And, of all things, a violin. You raise your eyebrow. A gardener shrugs. Some trees respond to strings. You step back outside and return to the orchard proper. A faint breeze rises, and with it comes a strange sound, faint and rhythmic, like breath. You realize it's the rustling of every leaf moving in harmony. The whole orchard, under cover of darkness, seems to exhale together. One of the older gardeners motions you to follow. He leads you behind the irrigation shed, to a spot you hadn't noticed before. Nestled there is a very old olive tree, far older than the rest. Its trunk is gnarled, hollow in places, with ivy crawling through its crevices. "We don't touch this one," he says. "She's the grandmother. Been here since Bayezid too." You sit in silence beside her, feeling the cool air hum around you. No trimming, no coaxing, no watching, just presence. It's said that some of the gardeners claim to dream more clearly when they sleep under this tree. Whether it's the tree or the power of suggestion, you're not sure, but the air here is noticeably heavier, like it's thick with memory. Before you leave, the gardener plucks a tiny branch of rosemary growing at the olive's base. He hands it to you without a word. You crush it gently in your fingers. The scent explodes, green, sharp, and clean. Somehow both invigorating and sleepy. You tuck it into your sleeve, a second keepsake. And as you walk slowly back through the orchard, stepping between sleeping trees, the moon high and generous, you realize nothing was rushed today. Not a single action was hasty. Everything here, from water to wind to whisper, runs on a different kind of time. You wake, well, not quite wake, more like blink yourself back into awareness, from a soft doze beneath a lanternlit arbor. The air hasn't changed. It's still soaked in calm, still warm with the sun's memory, still filled with the whisper of leaves and distant footsteps cushioned by moss-lined paths. Somewhere, a night bird calls. Not a shriek or a trill, just a gentle sound like a throat being cleared respectfully. Even the wildlife here knows how to behave. The garden's rhythm has slowed even more. You're in the final stretch of the night shift, the time when most gardeners, if they haven't already, begin to drift toward their sleeping quarters. But before they leave, there is one last nightly ritual, the inspection walk. A meandering stroll through the orchard's quietest corners, not to fix or tweak anything, but to note the mood. Yes, the mood. The trees, the soil, the pathways. They all have moods, apparently, and the gardeners have gotten good at reading them. You join a pair of them now, their hands behind their backs like philosophers out for a moonlit debate. You pass the citrus grove, the dwarf pomegranate row, and a cluster of plum trees so deeply purple in the dark they look almost black. A gardener stops and squints at one of them. "Too proud again," he says, like it's an inside joke. You nod sagely, pretending you understand. You don't, but at this point, you've accepted the orchard speaks a language of its own. And you're only just beginning to hear the verbs. A mainstream historical fact: palace gardens like these weren't just for growing food or pleasure. They were extensions of the court's philosophy: order through harmony, control through care, and elegance without excess. Gardeners were trained not merely in botany but also in etiquette, music, and sometimes even poetry. It wasn't unheard of for a gardener to recite verses to a struggling tree, not as whimsy, but as duty. Ottoman courts believed beauty responded to beauty. One of the gardeners on your walk starts humming, not a lullaby, not a song really, just a repeated string of tones, half notes and gentle intervals. You listen. It's the same pattern he used when watering earlier. You hadn't noticed then. The trees did, probably. As you round a corner, you see a row of what looks like covered cages, small, square, and made of wood lattice. Inside each sits a potted bonsai-style tree, each with a different shape, some windswept, some twisted, others as straight as spears. These, you're told, are the conversation trees. They're not for show or harvest. Each one has been pruned and trained to represent an idea: justice, restraint, curiosity. There's even one, short, knotted, and stubborn-looking, called the sultan's patience. No one's sure whether it's meant to flatter or tease. This is your fringe tidbit, that once, a gardener reportedly reshaped one of these trees to mirror the silhouette of a disgraced vizier, complete with flaring beard and stooped shoulders. It caused an uproar, and the gardener was nearly dismissed until the sultan walked by, burst out laughing, and declared it the most insightful commentary he'd seen that month. You lean in to examine one shaped like a spiraling staircase. It's supposed to represent reflection, or maybe regret. One gardener tells you the tree refuses to grow straight, no matter how they guide it. Another insists it's deliberate. No one really knows anymore. It's comforting, somehow, like even trees have phases where they just won't cooperate. Further along, you reach the mulch station. Not glamorous, but essential. Here, gardeners mix aged bark, sand, rose petals past their prime, animal manure, only the polite kind, goat or pigeon, never cow, and the occasional handful of ground clove or lavender. The result is a mulch blend that both nourishes and smells like a pastry shop the day before a festival. You help shovel a batch into a reed basket and carry it to a fig tree that's been struggling. You kneel, spread it gently at the base, and watch the dark blend settle into the roots. It's oddly satisfying, like tucking a blanket around a sleeping child. A gardener offers you a sip from his clay flask, steeped quince and ginger, made from overripe fruit that didn't make the royal selection. It's warm, earthy, and unexpectedly spicy. You cough once, then smile. For staying alert, he says. You're not convinced, but you take another sip anyway. The group starts dispersing, some toward the dormitories, others slipping silently into side paths that lead to the palace proper. You linger. There's a peaceful loneliness now, the good kind, like walking home after a perfect evening with friends. The inspection walk winds down as you pass one last surprise, a miniature grapevine, barely knee-high, curling around a wrought iron spiral frame. Its leaves are tiny but perfect. Its tendrils reach like hands. And its single, pearl-sized cluster of grapes? Immaculate. A gardener crouches beside it, whispering something you can't quite catch. You're told he's naming the grapes. Not collectively. Individually. You pause, unsure whether to be amused or impressed. You decide, both. Historians still speculate on how seriously Ottoman palace staff took their rituals. Were they symbolic? Satirical? Or simply ways of staying connected to plants? To place, to themselves, in a world that demanded perfection daily? Maybe they didn't care what the answer was. Maybe the doing was enough. You glance at the olive sprig tucked into your sleeve. Still fragrant. Still grounding. And somewhere in the dark, that old olive tree waits, unbothered by questions of symbolism or scholarship. She just grows. As you step back into the heart of the orchard, your feet brushing damp earth, a single grapevine tendril curls gently toward you, like it's waving goodnight. You nod back. Yes. Good night. You wake just enough to notice your shoulders have relaxed. You can't remember exactly when that happened, maybe while laying mulch, or maybe when you made eye contact with that unapologetically judgmental bonsai tree. Either way, you're softer now. Slower. As if you've been tuned to the orchard's frequency. The gardeners are mostly gone. Only one or two linger like gentle ghosts among the citrus rows, their shapes barely distinct from the trees they care for. You wander along the central path again, feet brushing aside the damp petals that have fallen like tiny, fragrant feathers. Tonight, you're drawn toward a quiet pavilion at the far end of the garden. It's raised on a wooden platform, ringed by low benches and partially enclosed by silk curtains that stir ever so slightly in the breeze. You step up, and the wood creaks politely under your weight, acknowledging your presence, not protesting it. This, you learn, is the resting space for the head gardener, the Boston Sabesai. He rarely sleeps here, but sometimes, when the night feels particularly harmonious or troubling, he'll recline in the pavilion and let the orchard speak to him. Or at least, that's what the others say. Whether he listens to the trees or his own thoughts is anyone's guess. There's a book on the bench. Bound in pale green leather, its corners softened by use. You open it and find page after page of elegant notes, some practical, others poetic. Not a journal, not a record, more like conversations. One entry reads, "Apricot branch bent too soon. Premature joy." Or message? Another, underlined 3 times, "Cherry bark split cleanly. Replace silver ring with silk one. Respect pain." It's a mainstream historical fact that the Ottoman palace, especially under Suleiman the Magnificent, kept detailed garden records, some blending horticultural science with poetry, mysticism, and personal reflection. These books weren't public documents. They were for the gardeners, by the gardeners, a shared code of care, culture, and quiet resistance to the hustle of the court. You run your fingers across the pages, not reading anymore, just feeling the indents of ink on paper. There's something holy about it, like the slow writing of monks, except the monastery is green, and its prayers bloom every spring. You close the book, tuck it back under the silk cushion, and lie down on the bench. From here, the orchard looks different. Wider. You realize you've always been seeing it from among the trees. Now you're above them, watching the garden stretch gently into itself. Somewhere to your left, a gardener's dog trots silently past. You hadn't seen it before. It's not a guard dog, too small and too uninterested. More like a companion. It pauses at a fig tree, gives it a meaningful sniff, and then trots off again as if it's just clocked out of a long shift. A fringe tidbit: some gardeners trained their dogs to signal root rot. No bark, no dig, just a certain kind of sit, nose pointed at the base of the tree. It's a method that's still occasionally used in rare tree cultivation today, particularly with endangered citrus in Anatolia. You wonder if this little mutt is one of those elite sniffer scholars. Probably not. But maybe. The moon's higher now. Everything is silver-edged and dreamlike. You notice something peculiar: a gardener painting. Yes, painting. A small scroll laid flat on a low table, brushes made of reed and sable. He isn't painting a tree, exactly, but something inspired by it, a swirling, abstract tangle of branches and light. It looks nothing like a pear tree, but somehow captures exactly how standing under one feels. He glances up. For the tree, he says simply. You blink, and he's back to work. You remember earlier when someone said trees respond to music. Maybe they respond to art too. Or maybe the act of painting changes the gardener more than the plant. You're beginning to see the secret. This is less about controlling nature and more about joining it. Just then, a faint bell rings from within the palace walls. Not an alarm, not a summons, just a soft chime to mark the deepest hour of the night. You check the sky and see the stars fading into a soft, faint blue at the edges. Dawn is still a way off, but it's starting to think about waking up. The air shifts again. Cooler now. Crisper. You notice that the trees respond too. Some leaves fold tighter. Others begin to tilt toward the east, anticipating the sun's return. A gardener unrolls what looks like a scroll on the ground, but it's not parchment, it's fabric. Thin linen marked with faint ink lines. You ask what it is. Map of the orchard sleep, he says, almost too quietly to hear. You blink again. You have to be dreaming now. But no, it's real. A literal map of how each tree responds to nighttime, where they droop, where they hum, where the sap slows. The gardeners track it like astronomers charting star paths. Every bend in a branch, every shadow's direction, recorded in symbols passed down through generations. Historians still debate whether this mapping of tree sleep was metaphor or method. Did it actually serve horticultural goals, or was it simply a deeply human way to feel closer to something that can't speak? The records suggest both. They always suggest both. You take another deep breath and glance at the grapevine again, the one with the named grapes. You're going to remember that one. Maybe even try it at home with your succulents, though they don't seem like the type to appreciate monikers. The dog returns and sits beside you without asking. You scratch behind its ears, and it sighs the sigh of something that's seen every tree in the orchard and found none of them worth barking at. In the distance, a rooster makes the half-hearted croak of someone who woke up too early and immediately regretted it. You smile, knowing it'll try again in 20 minutes, this time with conviction. You lean back against the bench and close your eyes. The night has not ended yet, but it's nearing its edge, the slow, drifting final act before the whole garden begins again. The dog stretches. The wind curls into your sleeve. You let your hand rest on the book one more time, just to feel the pages breathing beneath. And around you, the trees continue their secret conversations. You don't need to understand the language anymore. You've heard enough to know. Everything here is exactly where it's meant to be. You stir to a subtle shift in the air. No sudden sounds, no light bursting forth, just the soft suggestion that something is about to happen. That moment before sunrise when the world holds its breath, waiting to see whether the sun will remember to show up again. Spoiler: it always does. You rise from the bench slowly, careful not to wake the dog beside you, who is now curled into a tight cinnamon bun of fur and dreams. The garden around you is steeped in that grayish-blue light that flattens color and stretches shadows. The miniature trees look painted in ink wash, soft black trunks, pale leaves, and still no sign of birds. Even the birds know not to rush this hour. You drift back along the path toward the northern edge of the orchard, the section reserved for experimental trees. These aren't always symmetrical or pretty. Some lean dramatically, others have bark that peels in surprising patterns. There's even a lemon tree whose fruit turns orange halfway through ripening. The gardeners call it the rebellious cousin. This zone is where palace gardeners try out new grafts, new pruning methods, and occasionally, new rituals. You spot a half-dozen young trees bound carefully to bent frames, their limbs gently coaxed into spirals, hearts, or sweeping arcs. One tree looks like it's trying to tie itself into a knot. You suspect it's succeeding. It's here that the fringe ideas live, the ones not yet proven valuable enough to earn a spot in the core orchard but too interesting to abandon. A mainstream historical fact: Ottoman horticultural records describe gardens as living laboratories. In addition to feeding the palace, they tested foreign seeds from as far as Persia, India, and even Italy. If a rare plum did well, it could become a diplomatic gift. If it failed, it still earned a page in the scrolls. You run your fingers along the bark of a tree with green fruit the size of marbles. A gardener appears, gently plucks one, and offers it to you with a shrug. Too sour. We're hoping year 3 mellows it out. You bite into it anyway. It's like being slapped by a lime. Your jaw locks. Your eyes water slightly. But then, an odd warmth, almost floral. It fades quickly, like a thought you nearly had but lost. The gardener grins, scribbles something on a linen scrap, and tucks it into the bark like a secret. In one corner, you spot a wooden table stacked with brushes, dyed twine, shears, and small bells. Bells? You glance over. Sure enough, a gardener is attaching one to the lowest branch of a squat pear tree. It rings if foxes brush against it, he says. Are foxes a problem? You ask. No. But the tree likes knowing. This, you realize, is your fringe tidbit. Gardeners sometimes attach bells to their most temperamental trees, not as alarms, but as encouragement. When the wind rustled them just right, the trees got praised, as if their movement had been noticed and admired. It's silly, but also not. You've seen stranger methods tonight. You step past the experimental beds and find yourself facing a peculiar archway of twisted willow branches, draped in linen veils. It's not grand, more like a half-forgotten doorway in a dream. A gardener nods toward it. For moon pruning, she whispers. You step through. This inner grove, you're told, is reserved for pruning done only by moonlight, especially on nights before a new moon. The belief? That growth is gentler, sap steadier, and the trees more forgiving. Historians still argue over whether moon pruning was superstition or science. Some say it was about sap flow, others call it pure mysticism. The gardeners? They shrug. It works. Inside the moon grove, every sound is quieter. Leaves don't rustle, they breathe. You watch as a gardener clips one branch, then whispers an apology to the tree. You're not sure if it's a ritual or just good manners. Someone hands you a pair of shears. The handle is warm, as if it's been used for hours. You step toward a tiny plum tree, hesitate, and trim a single dead twig. You do it slowly, reverently. You don't apologize out loud, but you think the tree hears you anyway. There's a stillness afterward, like the garden itself is nodding. As you leave the grove, you feel cleaner. Not physically, though your hands are now sticky with sap and something that smells faintly of cardamom. No, it's something quieter, like your thoughts have been combed. The chaotic ones trimmed back. The best ones coaxed gently forward. The sun is beginning to hint at arrival now. The horizon is no longer gray-blue, but a faint, honest gold. And with it comes motion. Birds stretch. Leaves shimmer. The first fruit fly of the day zips past your ear with inappropriate enthusiasm. You follow a winding path that leads back toward the central orchard, where the earliest gardeners are beginning their shift. New faces, fresh robes, stiff backs still untouched by pruning stoops. You nod to them. One of them offers you a piece of dried melon from his satchel. You take it. It tastes like sunlight that's been put on hold. You realize that everything tonight has been about slow trust. The trust between gardener and tree, between shears and branch, between moonlight and growth. And somehow, you've been folded into that trust, like a note slipped between the pages of a well-loved book. You find a quiet bench near a mulberry tree, still dewy from the night. The leaves are trembling gently, ready to start photosynthesizing or philosophizing or whatever it is mulberry leaves do at dawn. And as you sit, your body wrapped in garden-scented stillness, you hear that same gentle bell again, the one tied to the pear tree. It chimes once. Just once. You smile. The tree knows. You blink slowly, eyelids heavier now than when the night first began, and realize you've made a complete circle. The garden has guided you not with signposts or paths, but by rhythm, by mood. What was once foreign has become familiar. You recognize the subtle lean of the almond trees, the way the apricot branches hold their silence until touched by sun, the exact shade of dusty green that clings to the cypress needles before the heat comes in. You're back near the old fountain, though this time it burbles a little more confidently. The water isn't rushing. Nothing in this garden ever rushes, but it's no longer tentative. It's just present, like it's shrugging off the stillness and deciding, fine, I guess I'll be alive again today. A gardener sits beside the fountain, slowly polishing a pair of silver pruning scissors with a cloth so soft it looks like it might disintegrate with too much sunlight. He's not young. In fact, he looks like he may have pruned the first tree in the garden, possibly using nothing but a stern glance. His hands move methodically, with the kind of patience that makes even the breeze slow down to watch. He doesn't look up, but says quietly, "Most people think pruning is taking away." You wait. He continues, "But really it's revealing. The shape was always there. You just let it out." And there it is, one of those little phrases that nestles into your brain and stays there. Long after you've forgotten who said it or where you heard it. Like a splinter, but pleasant. You watch as he finishes polishing and places the scissors into a lacquered box lined with soft wool. There are dozens of such tools, each perfectly arranged. Tiny curved blades for vines, thick shears for ancient trunks, miniature knives shaped like crescent moons for the fussiest grafts. You remember your earlier brush with pruning and suddenly feel both honored and wildly underqualified. Nearby, a young gardener is wrapping a tree limb in silk. Not to bind it, but to shield it from sunburn. Yes, tree sunburn is a real thing, especially for delicate species that have just been trimmed or transplanted. A mainstream historical fact is that Ottoman gardeners used silk and sometimes parchment to shield exposed bark, believing it helped reduce shock and stress. They even tinted the coverings with herbal infusions, chamomile, rose, aloe. Tree skincare, basically. You think about your own skin, about the harshness of the sun and the soothing comfort of something cool and damp. Maybe the trees aren't so different after all. You pass by a basket of tree paints, yes, paints, used to seal pruning cuts or ward off pests. The colors range from earthy browns to soft greens, but occasionally you spot a glint of blue or gold. A gardener notices your puzzled look and grins. For mood, he says simply. This, then, is your fringe tidbit. Some elite palace gardeners color-coded their pruning sealants based not on botanical needs, but emotional impressions. A cheerful tree might get a touch of gold. A grieving one, say, after a large branch had to be removed, might receive a dusting of violet. They claimed the trees responded better. Historians rolled their eyes. The trees, naturally, have refused to comment. You pause beneath a persimmon tree whose fruit gleams like tiny lanterns. A gardener passes and gestures upward. They taste like honey if you wait, like regret if you don't. You have no idea what that means, but you believe it instantly. In the distance, you hear music, soft, tentative notes from a ney flute. It meanders through the trees like incense smoke, slow and improvisational. The player sits on a low stool, back against a cherry tree, eyes closed. You realize now this isn't for anyone in particular. It's for the trees. Or maybe for the moment. The garden begins to shimmer. Not sparkle, exactly. More like the edges of things becoming softer, more suggestive. The sun is beginning its slow slide into view, and with it comes warmth. Color returns to the leaves. Shadows stretch and shrug themselves awake. The birds, finally convinced that it's safe to sing, start with tentative chirps and then crescendo into full-blown sunrise gossip. You spot one last ritual, a gardener walking with a small bowl of rose water, gently flicking droplets onto the soil at the base of every fifth tree. Not for watering, for greeting. Peace to your roots, he whispers, almost inaudibly each time. You repeat it under your breath, peace to your roots. It feels right. Another gardener is busy tying little fabric knots around a quince branch. To remember where it hurt, she says. So we don't press again next time. It hits you that this is more than gardening. It's care. Deep, preverbal, deliberate care. Every action in this garden, every snip, tie, droplet, bell, is a message. Some are loud, some whispered, but all say the same thing. We see you. We're here. You look down at your own hands. Dirt under your nails. A smudge of sap on your wrist. You've become part of this slow dance without noticing it. You've shed the layers of hurry, sarcasm, even thought. What remains is observation. Breath. Stillness. The final moment of pre-sunrise hush drapes itself across the orchard. That sweet pocket of time where everything glows and nothing expects anything of you yet. You feel it, not as a clock tick, but as a heartbeat pause. And you hold it, cradled softly in your chest. Then, without any fanfare, the light changes. Not a burst, but a blush. The first true rays crest the horizon, gently kissing the tops of the tallest fig trees. The orchard breathes in, as one, and just like that, the day begins. You return to the grove as dusk tiptoes in, slipping its lavender cloak across the treetops. The golden haze of afternoon has softened into gentle mauve, and the orchard seems to exhale a collective sigh of satisfaction. You find the gardeners assembled beneath the trellis once more, shears resting in their palms like confidants. No words are spoken. Pruning at twilight is a silent ceremony, the final farewell of the day's careful shaping. A gentle breeze stirs the leaves overhead, and you kneel beside a small cherry sapling whose shoots curve like question marks. A gardener lifts the slender silver shears and pauses, as if listening to the branch's own story. Then, with a stroke so smooth it could be mistaken for a caress, she trims away a wayward twig. You watch the cut edge glisten, then settle, ready to heal by morning. It's a mainstream historical fact that twilight pruning was practiced to reduce shock in cooler air, allowing cuts to seal more cleanly under softer conditions. You notice narrow benches placed strategically beneath the trees, each padded with woven silk, rare comfort for knees acclimated to soil and gravel. You accept an offer to sit and observe the silk cool against your skin. Before you, a gardener tends to a miniature fig tree, removing any shoots that compete with its central trunk. Each snip is deliberate, each scrap of removed leaf is examined, then pressed into a folded leaf book, a living journal of the tree's final form for the day. Here's a quirky detail. Some twilight pruners dip their shears in rose-scented oil before trimming, believing the fragrance would calm the tree and invite sweeter sap. You lean forward, catching the faintest hint of petals as the shears glide through a slender branch. It almost feels theatrical, soap opera drama played out on a botanical stage. As you breathe in the rose note, the head gardener steps forward, his posture solemn. He raises his hand in a silent signal, and all activity halts. He lifts a tiny blade to his forehead, then adjusts the silk cord tied around his wrist, a bracelet woven from grapevine tendrils. He murmurs an apology under his breath, "Forgive any misstep." The grove remains hushed, as though the trees themselves have paused in gratitude. Historians still debate whether this twilight apology ritual was intended for the trees or to center the gardeners themselves, an act of humility at day's end that bound human and plant in shared vulnerability. You feel a soft tug at your sleeve. A gardener offers you a single, almost perfect prune twig, its cut end sealed with a dab of green tree paint. He explains that visitors collect these tokens as reminders of the orchard's final form each day. You tuck it into your pocket, marveling at its smooth lines and purposeful angles. Nearby, a small brazier crackles to life, filled with pine charcoal and sprigs of dried thyme. The smoke spirals upward among the branches, carrying a resinous warmth that mingles with the night air. Gardeners dip feather quills into scented oil and lightly brush the smoke onto recent cuts, believing it both cleanses and seals, a fringe tidbit that combines antiseptic thinking with poetic flourish. As darkness deepens, lanterns glow again. But this time the light is softer, shifted into amber. Shadows pool beneath the trees, and you sense the orchard preparing for slumber. Gardeners stand back from their final cuts, sheaths clinking softly as tools are secured. They form a loose circle around the central fountain, where water lingers in shallow pools, reflecting flickering light. One gardener produces a handcrafted reed flute and offers it to you. You hesitate, but then lift it to your lips and play a single note, raw and wavering. It reverberates through the trellis, a private lullaby for every leaf. Instantly, you feel the orchard lean in, as if each branch strains to catch the sound. The flute passes to the next gardener, and soon a gentle harmony emerges, weaving through the trees. Notes rise and fall in a pattern that feels improvised yet intimate, music born of labor and lull. You close your eyes and let the melody guide you, every exhale matching the rhythm of leaves sighing in the lantern glow. When the last note fades, the gardeners bow their heads and press their palms to their hearts. A hush settles, so deep it seems to pulse with its own heartbeat. You take a steadying breath, feeling the weight of the day's care transform into this final gift, presence. You rise and walk slowly among the trimmed trees, touching bark cooled by night, inspecting the silhouettes your hands have helped create. Each tree stands as a rebirth, each cut a promise of tomorrow's growth. You inhale the mingled fragrances of pine, rose, and thyme, letting them anchor you. A gardener approaches and offers you a tiny clay cup of honey-infused water, a sweet, warming draught to close the senses. You sip, feeling the stickiness settle on your tongue. It tastes like dust distilled into flavor, like a sigh made liquid. You stand at the grove's edge, the circle of lantern light framing you and the gardeners inside like a living painting. Scissors tucked away, tools sheathed, songs sung, your shared day of shaping and soothing complete. Tonight, the trees rest shaped but unshackled, guided by hands that work in harmony with nature's own rhythm. As you step toward the palace gates, you realize you've become part of that rhythm too. Now, The orchard's edges blur into darkness as lanterns dim, and the garden exhales its final whispers. You move slowly, each step softer than the last, as though traversing a half-remembered dream. The scented smoke of pine and thyme lingers in your hair, and every breath you take carries a gentle warmth, as if the earth itself is breathing you back. Feel the weight of your body ease into itself. You are neither floating nor firmly planted, but somewhere in between, a place of peaceful suspension. Tiny sparks of memory flicker across your mind, the hiss of water, the glitter of dew, the resonance of that hushed final melody. Let each memory drift like a petal on a slow current, touching down and dissolving before you need to hold it. Allow your thoughts to settle. If worries surface, picture them curling into a pruned twig and slipping silently from your hand. Each concern becomes a soft echo, fading into the orchard's night. In its place, a gentle calm spreads through your limbs, pooling in your chest like warm honey. You are here, floating in an in-between moment where both days end and tomorrow's promise coexist. The garden's pulse slows, matching your own. You are invited to let go of time's urgency. There is no rushing. There is only this soft, steady peace. Carry this tranquility with you as you drift towards sleep. Feel roots of contentment anchor you, feeding a quiet growth beneath your eyelids. The orchard song fades to a silent hum, but its warmth remains, a gentle ember glowing at your core. Sleep now, dear listener. May your dreams be as tender as a pruned branch resting in a gardener's palm. Sweet dreams.